Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today at our virtual summit. My name is Tyler Wood, and I'm proud to kick off our workshop today, Multiple Funding Options for Online Curriculum. I am the Vice President of Marketing here at eDynamic Learning, and with me today is my good friend Steve Raleigh, who has worked in the EdTech market for over 25 years. He's worked for many well-known education publishers, such as Pearson, McGraw-Hill, HMH, and the Master Teacher, as well as acted as advisor for many more. Steve is a CEO and founding partner of Advocate. He owns his own consulting firm, which helps educational companies understand the needs of the school and the K-12 market. Steve holds a BS in economics from Brigham Young University and is currently studying special education and business law at Concord Law School at Purdue University Global. Steve specializes in federal and state policy and funding, digital curriculum, and special education. Many of you provided questions when you registered for the webinar, which we've given to Steve, so he's worked that into his presentation. And also, with so many of you on the virtual call today, you will remain in mute, but feel free to chat any additional questions in the chat panel window, and I'll be sure to track that, and so I can give those to Steve, and we'll have him work in as many questions as he can get in. And if he doesn't have time, we'll make sure to reach out and get those answers for you. So from there, I'm going to let Steve take it away, and thank you so much, Steve, for being here. We're excited, so thank you.
I'm excited too. This is a great event, and I think everybody's tired here by Saturday afternoon. So I'm going to do my best to keep everybody awake as we go through this. It is difficult. Hold on one second. It has decided to give me a different set of. There we go. All right, now I've got it. It's hard to understand what funding options you can take advantage of right now until you understand a little bit about our predicament in the United States with funding. If we look back long ago, back into the mid-90s, there was a revision of the education law that became a standard-driven program. So in the 90s, some of you remember the Goals 2000 programs. When you met certain standards, you received federal money to purchase products. Then the big change happened in 2001. No Child Left Behind, NCLB, was in as the law of the land for 16 years. Most of us, if not all on this call, joined the education industry under No Child Left Behind and knew nothing else about education except how it worked under NCLB. And in 2016, as we rolled into ESA, Every Child Succeeds Act, there's some big differences. You'll notice the two maps that are on this slide. The orange under NCLB signifies the desire of the Department of Education to have all 50 states with similarities, so they had an easier time distributing money. So the accountability system and the standards were driven for every state. Remember Common Core. With ESA, there's been a major revision in the way that our government looks at education. Every state has been able to provide their own plans, and now we have a different type of funding model. This is important to understand because when we started, this back in the mid-90s, educational technology and online curriculum, the federal money was very small, 3% of overall funding to any schools. And it was only important in that with some districts, they could make up as much as 20% of their discretionary money. Most of the money came from local and state governments and through your tax process, depending on the state that you're in. Under No Child Left Behind, the federal contribution increased dramatically. And under No Child Left Behind, many districts received a good portion, if not the majority, of their discretionary money from the federal government. Under ESA, and particularly with this new pandemic, we're going to be seeing some very different dynamics in educational funding. Like it happened last year, and actually even back in 2015 and 2016, the states are still funding the majority of the school dollars. Back in 2008 and 2009, when we had many of us go through this process of economic dip and schools lost money, the states had to balance their budgets, and the federal government had to come back in with large stipends or large amounts of money. That is a similar situation to what we're facing right now. Right now, the states are trying to figure out how do we balance our budget and keep our educational programs going, and they're lobbying the federal government to make up the difference in what they were budgeting as a state, and to make sure that there's the discretionary dollars in the marketplace to do the things that educators need. So this federal money is going to be very important. So when we look at purchasing technology under ESA, it's important that we understand the billions of dollars that the federal government now gives slides between the Department of Education, Congress, and the DOE down to the state level. The legislatures and the state departments of education have approved plans with the federal DOE that they are going to spend the money according to the plan they put in with the federal government. And the local education school districts, the ones who receive the dollars that have been drifted from the federal to the state and the state to the local districts, and the principals and district administrators who are making spending decisions, there's this very traceable line from where you get your money. The question we all need to be asking is, what's the price? You know, if we're following the money and we see how we get the money, what do we owe in return? And that has changed significantly from No Child Left Behind under this new model of funding. So to give you an idea of how that works, we're going to take a look at CTE, or Career and College Readiness. Many of us use those terms synonymously. We didn't realize there was a difference between college and career readiness, or CTE, technology education. And under No Child Left Behind, there was a very small deviation between them. Under the new models, some states have separated more completely and running two programs, CTE and CCR, and they're doing that because of the way the money is coming from the federal government. If you look at the blue quadrant over here, this is a model we adapted from Wisconsin's Department of Education. And for the recipients of the Perkins 5 funds, they have to provide back to the state, and which the state then provides back to the funding source, back to the Perkins administrators, 7 sets of data. They've got CTE concentrator, the non-certified career education programs, and then the single parent status for those who are recipients. And they have to provide the data sets that are included in green. So the public LEAs for grades 9 through 12, the CTE information is just for the upper 2 grades. 9 through 12, though, has to be submitted back with the Perkins data, and it overlaps with the CCR money, which comes out of ESA. So non-certified career, there's 1 data set there, there's 9 under certified career, and there's 1 under grade sets. The same thing now, there's another group of information data that has to be pulled and transmitted back to the state, and from the state to the federal government, to keep those funds flowing. So, earlier we talked about following the money, and now we understand that money follows data. So what we've discussed is that the federal government provides money to the state then gives it to the school district, and for that money, the school district returns promised sets of data according to the state plan, and then that is funneled back up to the federal government. So as we give them the data for how our products have performed or how our school programs have grown, they then release more money out of the next budget cycle. So it is a very tight loop. We get the differences that we spoke of above with CTE and CCR by looking at the different funding programs that are part of the federal matrix. So under ESA, that is where the traditional funds that we talk about, Title I, Title II, Title III, and we look at the disadvantaged populations, free or reduced lunch, we look at preparations for teachers, PD, and we look at the bilingual. That's all funding that comes under the Every Student Succeeds Act. There are other ways, though, to fund similar programs. IDEA, which are funds for those with special needs, provides educational opportunities. It'll fund programs for students at the lower end of the spectrum, those who have disabilities, in their CTE or college and career readiness. There's money to help prepare students who have not, don't have the same opportunities coming into the school as others. Again, we've got Perkins, which is another federal program that's tied on its own with its own accountability, and that then funnels to your state. And there are a number of programs and initiatives that are being run by other government entities, other groups that are providing educational funds like the National Science Foundation or other groups that are working on that federal level. That funding comes to the state. Oftentimes the states combine the state money and the federal money into one program, one name. And so it may be difficult at the local level to understand where are my federal dollars here, but every state has a publicly available plan that explains how they combine the funds from the federal and the state to funnel it down to your district. And the type of funds you are receiving determines the type of data that you have to return. One of the most important elements when we look at accountability is we have to think a bit and understand, why are we receiving the money? This was one of the most important changes made under ESA, and it is one of the most difficult. We spend more time working with school districts on this model so that they understand accountability. Tier 4, that is the research that we are all used to using under No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind required that there be some sort of research, something that backed up the program that we were putting into the classroom. And as long as there was a research basis, schools were able to spend. Under ESA, under Every Student Succeeds Act, that level of data, the idea that a program was supported by a federal research grant or was associated with a university's work, that is now the lowest level of acceptable evidence for programs in the school districts. We're asked frequently, what is it that we need to do as a local district to get more money for programs our schools need? And my answer always is, look at your data and form program partnerships with the teachers or your larger groups of educators in areas, and then especially with the vendors that you're working with in the school. This is a symbiotic relationship. We're all in this together. So educators can start a small pilot if there's something that is research-based and that has a reasonable chance of success. That's the way it's worded. And that is the tier 4 research. We cannot go building wide, we can't go district wide just because of some research now. We have to run a small pilot, and then from that small pilot, we prove that we had some level of effectiveness. That's now moving us into tier 3. Once we understand that we have effectiveness, then we can get a bigger pilot. We can get something more substantial in place. This is a requirement that's actually easy to meet. It's correlative evidence, meaning it's an after the fact form of research. If we can find data that shows an improvement because we had a certain program or we introduced technology of a certain kind into our school, that can be driven, those data points can be analyzed, and as long as there's a correlative relationship between the success in the program and the success in the school grades, then you're able to put in a larger context or a larger program. And the next step is probably the most important step that we can talk about today, is what does it mean to have tier 2 or tier 1 evidence? Tier 2 means that you can be quasi-experimental, meaning you don't have to perform the deeper rigor that's associated with having a control group and then having a separate test group. Rather, it's quasi-experimental. It still has to be planned, but it doesn't have the same level of rigor. And the benefit of tier 2 data is it allows us to scale up, meaning if we've had a good experience, we've had some classrooms or schools or programs successfully launched in our district or in a district that's exactly similar, same demographics, same type of student profiles within a certain tolerance, as long as it's succeeded in that population, you can come into a product with a much larger scale up. So if you've created your own research at the bottom, you've done your own correlative study that said, hey, this program does something for us, you can step into a larger pilot, and possibly if your next semester or your next year goes positively, then you can receive the funds because the data supports your use of expanding your purchase of any given program. This becomes more important now for us as educators, particularly with the challenges that we have with the pandemic. I'm going to step back up here for just a moment when we look at this slide. For all of us, I don't think any of us saw coming when this last semester started that there would be a pandemic. I had barely learned the name of coronavirus when it seemed like weeks later everything was shut down. Like you, we had children at college and we had a lot of things that we had to bring back. I had a daughter that was already in an online school and they changed her curriculum up. So it was kind of a very difficult thing for anybody to adapt to, but we've done it as a country. The challenge that we're facing now and that we need to be planning for now at the state level and at the local level is looking forward and understanding the challenges that we're going to have or will likely have. We don't know the depth of the impact on the economy, but we do know that most states have educational funding plans that involve a tax base and that the legislature has to approve monies to go towards education. So one way or another, our money, which comes from the state legislatures, is going to be associated with a tax somewhere. And we don't know what the impact of that is going to be. We don't know what's going to happen next year and how states are going to be addressing the budgetary issues. We don't know, besides what we learned earlier, where the federal money is coming, what the budget expectations were for this year. But we do know that it's in everybody's best interests to work carefully to get the most bang for each of our expenditures. The two areas that are going to be perhaps the most important in the upcoming season is going to be first, how you are using and funding technology. Data that comes from technology is highly trusted, more than data that may be inconsistent or subjective. I don't know the rationale for this on all levels, but if data has come from a controlled setting and it means what it is said to portray, that is easily trusted. That means that there is going to be technology involved in stemming the challenge that's coming up, whether it's in our student information systems, whether it's in the programs like eDynamic learning or other digital systems that you might be using in your school district. That data is going to be what you need to prepare your emergency plans and demonstrate that you can meet the needs of your students first, and then of course the needs of your teachers. The learning environment this year, what we've seen during the pandemic, is going to be a model that extends for many. We don't know how it's going to return. I can't tell you whether everybody's going to be in a digital environment or a quasi-digital. We spoke earlier of different methods in which technology can be used, but I can tell you that whatever method that you choose to adapt your programs for is going to require data to be kept and to be rolled forward. The requirements under ESA, IDEA, and Perkins are three sources of funding that can be used for CTE or CCR programs. And as states have determined how they're going to collect and transmit that data, this is a very good funding model. A school district would be safe in looking at ESA as a means of covering part of their Title I curriculum for advancing students who will be going graduating soon. They can look at using funds where there's overlap in students. They can use IDEA to help move and forward some of those students. They can look at ways to use or put the funds, I don't want to say commingled. We've got to be careful here that we're using similar funding sources collectively to come to a correct output. And the same with Perkins. There's a lot more flexibility now than there's ever been in using these types of funding sources for technology. The second element here is the Title II that you receive under ESA, and part of the funds that come with Perkins and IDEA all serve a purpose in professional development. So as we look at what is our digital strategy, how are we going to meet the needs of the many with less money? The other question we have to answer is how are we going to meet the needs of the teachers with less money? How do we try to make this dollar stretched further? The most effective strategies that we have seen in the last 3 years all come from districts who have found ways to use multiple funding sources collectively to achieve their goals. That means, though, that they have to keep careful record of the data so that each of those funding sources receives the data that supports how the money's been spent. And those districts that have been the most successful and have seen gains not only with their students, but with the funding sources they're receiving, all of them have strategic partnerships with digital partners. So I believe, and I will kind of go out here on the limb saying, I believe this is an ecosystem, both with the way funding is coming from the federal to the state to the local, and accountability is going from the local to the state to the federal. The other ecosystem is teachers and administrators working together with their educational partners, who's helping you with the digital technologies that you need, the platforms or the equipment in the buildings. They also benefit when they work in partnerships with school districts. So it's important that we take time to think carefully through these strategies. I would personally make the recommendations that you work with other technology partners, whether that be other school districts that are pooling resources, or that be providers who are curating content and building more robust data systems and delivery systems. This problem won't be solved in an isolated way. It's going to require that educators and those who serve from a product design and creation perspective, that they are collaborating and sharing transparently the data that both groups will need to have. So I don't know if we have any time for questions. I think we've got a few minutes, Tyler.
Yep. Thank you so much. There's just, it sounds like the reporting, like what you're saying, is really critical, that if you're using a technology, it gives you the reporting to be able to show the data of how the students are doing or where they're struggling. Does that basically summarize what you said?
It does, yeah. Most of the data systems, the states have had to commit to creating a system that gathers data from the school districts and then places that in a format that is sent to the federal government. So there's an architecture that has been committed to by each state. And the data that they are taking comes traditionally from systems that are already in the school district. It's your partner like eDynamic Learning that has data on the students, how much time, what did they look at, what was their performance, and then they'll match that with other data points that were collected in the student information system. And that collectively, those two sources of data are carried forward in the reporting back to the state, and then are part of what the state then assembles and provides to the federal government.
This last question, they want to know if they can use PD dollars to pay for things like Chromebooks and also digital curriculum. Is that allowed?
So using professional development dollars to pay for other things inside the school. Is that, am I understanding correct what the question is?
Yep.
Okay. Yes. So I'm going to say yes. In that, some of that same technology is necessary to train the teacher, and in that it's already in the school and it served its purpose for that. And this is where that matching of funds goes. That's where we look at a program. There's part PD, there's part student usage, and we start to pull those dollars together. If a teacher, for example, or if a school is receiving their PD and it's got a digital component, and there needs to be a purchase of technologies to support that digital component for the teacher. So that might be in classroom computer, it might be some professional devices, depending how the school approaches it. Those PD dollars can be spent in a way that supports the school's needs from technology, and those things can be repurposed to serve other purposes, as long as the primary goal, the professional development of the teacher, is met. So we need to show that if we've used the PD dollars towards an initiative, that the portion that we've applied from PD resulted in teachers who were better able to provide, digital curriculum online, for example. How do you provide students at home a learning experience if you haven't learned how to teach in a digital environment? That's a great strategy then to both bring equipment in for the teachers and possibly contribute to the architecture for the student.
And we know that PD is so essential. Poor teachers, I feel for them right now because they're being expected to do a lot in this COVID crisis. So I can imagine that PD would be really, really essential and helpful right now. We are actually out of time, Steve. I'm getting so many great questions and comments about your information being so helpful. So thank you so much. If you guys have more questions for Steve, we're sending out a survey. So you're welcome to give more questions if you want to think on it. I'll make sure that Steve gets those questions and we get those answers back to you. Again, thank you so much for being with us here today. You're also going to receive a a certificate of participation, just showing that you were here. A lot of schools are allowing that as a PD itself. So we're glad to be able to provide that with you. And again, thank you. I saw so many of you who've been with us all day today and yesterday. So thanks so much for being with us on this wonderful weekend, and have a great rest of the one for you. Thanks again, Steve, for being with us.
Absolutely.
Take care.